Chapter 1. The Kentucky Cabin and the Very Early Years. Abraham Lincoln was born on the 12th day of February in the year 1809. The precise location of his birth was a small, rudimentary log cabin situated near the Big South Fork of Nolan Creek in what was then Hardin County, now LaRue County, within the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The cabin itself represented extreme simplicity, measuring approximately 16 feet in length and 18 feet in width. Its construction involved the laborious felling of numerous trees and the careful, though imprecise, notching of logs at their respective corners to ensure a basic interlocking and a degree of structural stability. This unceasing toil continued day after day, week after week, season after season. The financial means of the family were consistently and undeniably meager. They possessed very little in terms of material wealth or accumulated possessions of significant value. No grand estates, no substantial sums of money, no valuable heirlooms. Their daily lives were a continuous, unrelenting struggle, a persistent effort to simply make ends meet, to provide the most fundamental necessities for their small family, namely adequate food, basic shelter, and simple utilitarian clothing, all procured through their own strenuous efforts on the land. This initial period in the Nolan Creek cabin was short, but it established the foundational conditions of his earliest life, one of inherent simplicity and continuous physical exertion, a very quiet beginning for a life that would become anything but quiet. The sounds of the frontier, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of insects, and the distant call of an animal, all formed part of his very first memories. The interior floor was most often nothing more than compacted earth, or, in some instances, crudely split logs referred to as puncheons. These puncheons were roughly leveled by hand, yet remained uneven underfoot, creating an irregular surface. Heat and light were consistently provided by a fireplace constructed from locally sourced stone and bound together with mud or clay. This fireplace served multiple functions. It offered warmth during the often cold Kentucky winters. It provided a flickering illumination after the sun had set, and it functioned as the sole cooking apparatus for the family's simple meals. Smoke, the byproduct of the burning wood, ascended either through a modest opening in the roof or through a rudimentary chimney fashioned from sticks and reinforced with clay. The conditions within were undeniably primitive, lacking any modern conveniences or comforts, but they were entirely typical for the vast majority of families on the American frontier. During that specific historical period, a time characterized by minimal material possessions and maximum reliance on self-sufficiency. His parents were Thomas Lincoln and Nancy Hanks Lincoln, both individuals of profoundly humble lineage. Their respective family histories traced back through generations of farmers and laborers in the rural South. Both Thomas and Nancy had received very little in the way of formal schooling. Their education was primarily practical and experiential, derived from the daily necessities of frontier survival. They were predominantly subsistence farmers, their existence inextricably linked to the rhythms of the land and the changing seasons. Their daily lives were dictated by the constant and unceasing effort required to cultivate a small number of crops, typically corn and a few other staples, and to raise a very small quantity of livestock, such as pigs or chickens, primarily for their own family's sustenance. Any meager surplus that might occasionally be generated would be traded or bartered with neighbors or at a distant general store for other essential goods not available on their isolated farm. The nature of their existence was arduous, marked by relentless physical labor, extending from the very first light of dawn until the last vestiges of natural light faded from the sky. Chapter 2. Knob Creek and the Move to Indiana. The Lincoln Family. Characteristic of many frontier families during the early 19th century, did not maintain a fixed residence for an extended period of time. Their movements were often motivated by a persistent search for better quality land, a more secure and clearer title to existing property. The family moved from their initial cabin on Nolan Creek to a nearby farm situated on Knob Creek. He later recounted that his earliest recollection was of a night when the entire family was forced to seek shelter outside their cabin due to an unusually severe thunderstorm. He also remembered a flash flood on Knob Creek that washed away a small patch of corn that he and his older sister, Sarah, had planted. The Lincoln family made the momentous decision to relocate from Kentucky across the Ohio River to the developing territory of Indiana, specifically to the dense forests of what would later become Spencer County in the southern part of that state. This decision was driven by multiple factors: the ongoing disputes over uncertain land titles in Kentucky, which caused constant legal and financial insecurity, the perceived availability of cheaper and more readily accessible land in Indiana, which offered clearer title and more reliable ownership, and a moral opposition to slavery held by Thomas Lincoln, who sought to raise his family in a free state. These memories, though seemingly minor, highlighted the constant vulnerability of frontier life to the unpredictable forces of nature. It involved the laborious packing up of all their extremely limited belongings into a simple wagon or carrying them by hand over challenging terrain. They traversed undeveloped wilderness, pushing through dense, unbroken forests, navigating over rough, rudimentary paths, or forging entirely new ones through the undergrowth. This was a significant and arduous undertaking for a young family, a testament to their resilience and their unwavering determination to seek a better life in a new environment, a new beginning in a new state, the promise of fresh opportunities and the hope of greater stability in a new place. A fresh start in the dense woodlands of southern Indiana marked a quiet migration towards an uncertain yet hopeful future. The sounds of the wagon wheels on the rough earth and the rustle of leaves underfoot were all part of this slow, deliberate journey. This new location was approximately 10 miles to the northeast of their previous residence, still within the confines of Hardin County, Kentucky. This Knob Creek farm offered several perceived advantages: slightly more fertile soil, which promised better crop yields, and slightly better access to sources of fresh water from the creek itself. The family resided here for a period of 5 years, 5 years of continuous farming, maintaining the daily routines of simple, unadorned existence amidst the natural rhythms of rural life, or simply the enduring hope of improved prospects and a more promising future, a new beginning in a more advantageous location. The first significant relocation for young Abraham occurred in the year 1811, when he was approximately 2 years old. During these 5 years on Knob Creek, Abraham Lincoln experienced some of his very earliest memories, some of the first conscious perceptions of the world around him. It was during this time on Knob Creek that Abraham Lincoln received his very first, albeit extremely limited, formal schooling. He attended what was known as a blab school for very brief and intermittent periods. The teachers, Zachariah Riney and later Caleb Hazel, instructed a small group of children in a simple log structure. The primary method of instruction involved students repeating lessons aloud, hence the term blab school. The curriculum was rudimentary, focusing on the absolute basics of reading, writing, and fundamental arithmetic. These were fleeting exposures to organized education, but they represented his initial steps into the world of literacy and formal learning. Then, a much larger and far more significant move occurred in the autumn of the year 1816, when Abraham had reached the pivotal age of 7. The journey itself was not a short or comfortable undertaking. Chapter 3: Indiana Wilderness and Life of Toil upon their arrival in the dense, unbroken wilderness of Spencer County, Indiana, in the late autumn of 1816. The Lincoln family immediately confronted the harsh realities of frontier settlement. There was no pre-existing cabin, no cleared fields, just an expansive, primordial forest. Thomas Lincoln, a skilled carpenter and frontiersman, began the laborious and physically demanding process of establishing a new home for his family. This was the expected and arduous routine for any pioneering settler in an undeveloped territory. The very first structure they constructed was a simple, half-faced camp. This cabin was a more substantial structure than the half-faced camp, but still simple in its design and execution. His days were filled, from early morning until late evening, with physical labor and responsibilities. There was little opportunity for recreation, for play, or for any consistent formal schooling. The demands of immediate survival took absolute precedence. Any moments of respite were rare and cherished. The sounds of constant chopping, the scent of wood smoke, and the vast quiet of the forest were the sensory markers of his early Indiana years. This was a quiet life of hard, unceasing work under the canopy of the forest. It was built using the same methods of notched logs and rudimentary roofing. It was here that the family settled into a more stable, yet still arduous, frontier life. This rudimentary shelter consisted of 3 walls made of logs, with the 4th side left entirely open towards a continuous fire. This provided basic protection from the elements and from wild animals, while serving as their temporary dwelling during the initial, brutal Indiana winter. His contributions were essential to the family's survival. He learned to wield an axe from a remarkably young age, assisting in the felling of smaller trees and the clearing of dense underbrush. He learned to split logs into manageable pieces for firewood and into rails for the construction of fences. He helped prepare timber for the more permanent cabin that would eventually replace the temporary camp. These activities were not occasional or leisurely chores. They were continuous, unceasing, forming his daily routine and his constant contributions to the family economy and their very survival, thus establishing the foundational bedrock of his young existence. It was a cold and challenging period for the family, including the young Abraham, who was now 7 years old, and his older sister, Sarah. Following the construction of the temporary camp, the primary and immediate task was the clearing of land from the surrounding dense woodlands. This involved immense physical exertion and continuous manual labor. Large, towering trees had to be laboriously felled, one by one. Their massive trunks then needed to be removed or rolled aside, their stubborn, deeply rooted stumps painstakingly extracted or slowly burned out, a slow and arduous process, all undertaken to create open fields suitable for cultivation and for subsistence farming. This required an immense amount of physical strength, unwavering endurance, and persistent, unceasing effort with only the most basic of hand tools. Young Abraham, from his very early childhood, was not merely an observer, but an active and expected contributor to these demanding and often monotonous tasks. The construction of the permanent log cabin began once sufficient timber was prepared. Leisure time for Abraham was minimal, almost non-existent. Chapter 4: The Loss of His Mother and Stepmother's Influence. A profound and devastating tragedy struck the Lincoln family in the autumn of the year 1818. Abraham Lincoln's mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, passed away on October 5, 1818. She was only 34 years old. It instilled in him a deep and enduring sense of sadness, a feeling of profound incompleteness, and a quiet, persistent grief that would stay with him throughout his entire life. The loss of his mother at such a tender age was a formative experience, shaping his character and his empathy. His older sister, Sarah, who was 11, took on many of the household duties in the absence of their mother. She was warm and nurturing, unlike his somewhat more stoic and demanding father. She quickly recognized his nascent intelligence, his unusual intellectual curiosity, and his insatiable desire for knowledge. She actively encouraged his reading and fostered his burgeoning intellectual appetite, providing a much-needed sense of stability and encouragement, a truly crucial and profoundly positive influence during his formative years. The household became more somber, more difficult, and less nurturing. She brought books and furniture and a sense of order to the humble cabin. She treated Abraham as if he were her own son, showing him affection and respect for his intellectual leanings. This period of adjustment for the combined family was initially complex, but ultimately very beneficial for Abraham's personal and intellectual development. He later referred to his stepmother with profound affection, stating that she was a good and kind mother. Her encouragement undeniably facilitated his relentless pursuit of self-education during this period. He continued to devour books whenever he could find them and buy whatever light was available, often by the flickering glow of the fireplace or a rudimentary candle long after others had gone to sleep. This sustained self-study was the primary source of his expanding knowledge and his evolving understanding of the world. This was a quiet period of reading and internal growth in the Indiana wilderness. The cause of her death was a then prevalent and mysterious illness known as milk sickness. This disease was caused by drinking milk from cows that had ingested the poisonous white snakeroot plant, which was common in the frontier woodlands. The symptoms were severe, including vomiting, weakness, tremors, and ultimately, in many cases, death. The lack of medical understanding and treatment options on the frontier meant that the disease was often fatal. Her death left an undeniable and deep void in the life of the young Abraham, who was then only 9 years old. For approximately 1 year after Nancy's death, the Lincoln household remained without a clear female figure. Thomas Lincoln struggled to manage the daily chores and the care of his 2 young children. Life on the frontier without a wife was exceptionally challenging and often unsustainable. Then, in the late autumn of 1819, approximately 1 year after Nancy's passing, Thomas Lincoln returned to Kentucky to find a new wife. He married Sarah Bush Johnston on December 2, 1819. She was a widow with 3 children of her own: Elizabeth, Matilda, and John. Thomas and Sarah had known each other from their youth in Kentucky. He returned to Indiana with his new wife and her 3 children, effectively blending two families into one new household. Sarah Bush Johnston, Lincoln, proved to be a kind woman, a compassionate presence, and a deeply supportive figure in Abraham's life. She created a more nurturing and intellectually stimulating home environment for him and for his new step-siblings. Chapter 5: Continued Self-Education and the Flatboat Journeys. Abraham Lincoln's insatiable thirst for knowledge persisted, unabated, throughout his teenage years in Indiana. Despite the continuous demands of arduous physical labor and the extreme scarcity of formal schooling, his education was overwhelmingly self-directed and self-motivated. He truly was a diligent autodidact, the dim, wavering glow of the hearth providing the only illumination for the treasured pages of borrowed texts. Sometimes he would read outdoors during his breaks from work, or even by moonlight when the weather permitted and the moon was bright enough. These journeys were instrumental in broadening his horizons and providing him with invaluable exposure to a world beyond the confines of the Indiana frontier. He read aloud to himself and to others to better absorb the material and to develop his oratorical skills. He was hired by Denton Offutt, a businessman from the small village of New Salem, Illinois, to help build a flatboat and then navigate it downriver to New Orleans. This second journey further solidified his observations about slavery and reinforced his growing moral opposition to the institution. These voyages provided him with invaluable exposure to diverse people from different regions of the country, to different customs, and to the wider world of commerce. They broadened his perspective beyond the narrow confines of frontier farming and local communities, marking a quiet transformation of his worldview through travel and direct observation. These experiences were crucial in shaping his later political views and his eventual actions regarding the fundamental issue of human liberty. The slow movement of the flatboat down the great river and the distant calls of steamboats were all part of this formative, quiet period of expansion. He was hired by a local merchant named James Gentry to transport a cargo of agricultural produce downriver to the bustling port city of New Orleans, Louisiana. This voyage was a major undertaking and his first significant departure from home. It exposed him, for the very first time, to the complex commercial world of a major port city with its diverse populations and its intricate systems of trade. More importantly, it exposed him to the stark and brutal reality of slavery firsthand in the Deep South. He witnessed the pervasive institution, the public slave markets, the forced labor, and the systemic cruelty inherent in human bondage. This early exposure to the institution of human bondage made an undeniable and profound impact on his developing conscience, on his moral compass, and on his fundamental convictions regarding the inherent wrongness of one human being owning another. He continued to read every single book he could get his hands on, regardless of its subject matter or its condition. These included the King James Bible, which he knew intimately and which influenced his prose style, Aesop's fables, providing simple yet profound moral lessons, Pilgrim's Progress, a spiritual allegory that offered insights into human struggle, Robinson Crusoe, an adventure story that sparked his imagination, and Parson Weems's Life of Washington, a popular biographical account which instilled in him an early appreciation for American history and the virtues of its founders. He also read legal and historical texts whenever he could find them, such as the statutes of Indiana and other states, and early collections of American oratory. This constant exposure to well-crafted language, to profound ideas, and to moral narratives instilled in him a lifelong love for language, a deep fascination with ideas, a relentless desire for knowledge, and a developing nuanced understanding of human nature, of moral principles, and of the intricate structure of effective communication. Books were precious commodities on the frontier, and he sought them out with relentless persistence. He would borrow them from any neighbor or passing traveler who possessed even a single volume, often walking many miles to do so. He devoured books whenever and wherever possible, often by the flickering light of the fireplace in the evenings after a long and exhausting day of manual labor. The foundational, literary, and historical texts that profoundly shaped his early mind continued to be revisited and deeply absorbed. In addition to his ongoing self-education, Abraham Lincoln undertook 2 significant flatboat voyages down the mighty Mississippi River. The first journey occurred in the year 1828, when he was 19 years old. The second flatboat voyage took place in the year 1831, after his family had relocated to Illinois. Chapter 6: New Salem. A crucible of growth. Abraham Lincoln's arrival in the small, burgeoning village of New Salem, Illinois, in the summer of 1831 marked a significant and transformative period in his early adulthood. He had just returned from his second flatboat voyage to New Orleans. New Salem, though small, was a hub of activity, a crossroads, and a vital center for local trade and community interaction. He also served briefly as an assistant at a local mill, gaining further insight into the local economy and the intricate processes of agricultural production and milling. He taught himself the complex principles of surveying entirely through self-study, once again utilizing borrowed books and instructional manuals, such as Aaron Burr's Surveying. He participated actively in local discussions at the general store, at community gatherings, and at other social hubs. However, he gained invaluable experience and made important connections with influential individuals in the region. He quickly learned from his first electoral defeat and ran again for the General Assembly in 1834. And this time, he was overwhelmingly successful. He was elected as one of the representatives from Sangamon County. This marked the true beginning of his formal political career. He served 4 consecutive terms in the Illinois General Assembly, from 1834 to 1842. During this period, he eventually relocated from New Salem to Springfield, the newly designated state capital. In 1837, his rich and varied experiences in New Salem as a diligent clerk, a reliable postmaster, and a precise surveyor were undeniably crucial in preparing him for the substantial challenges of legislative service and the subsequent pursuit of a distinguished legal career. This was a quiet period of intense learning and profound personal and professional growth in a small frontier town, setting the foundational stage for his much larger future endeavors. The sounds of the community and the quiet turning of book pages all contributed to the slow, steady development of the man. He demonstrated a natural talent for public speaking and for logical, persuasive argument. In 1832, he decided to run for the Illinois General Assembly, his first formal foray into elective politics. He issued a detailed public statement announcing his candidacy, in which he advocated for crucial internal improvements, such as navigable rivers and canals, to boost local economies, and for the critical importance of public education. He also served briefly as a captain in the Black Hawk War, a minor Native American conflict. Though he saw no actual combat, he gained leadership experience and military insights, which he later applied to a far greater conflict. This was a technically demanding task, requiring exceptional precision, mathematical aptitude, and a keen eye for detail. He learned to meticulously map out land, to accurately draw property boundaries, and to resolve complex land disputes, which were frequent on the frontier. This skill was in exceptionally high demand in the rapidly developing frontier region, and it provided him with a stable and respectable income. It also offered him further exposure to the intricacies of property law and the processes of community development. These diverse occupations provided him with a broad range of practical skills, with a breadth of real-world experience, and with a deeper, more nuanced understanding of the intricacies of society, of commerce, and of human interaction. This was a gradual, yet profound, accumulation of knowledge and experience during this quiet, yet intensely productive period. More significantly, he was appointed the postmaster of New Salem in May of 1833. This seemingly minor governmental position was in fact crucial for his burgeoning intellectual development, as it brought him into regular and consistent contact with news and information from across the entire expanding country. He eagerly and diligently read newspapers and various periodicals that passed through his hands before delivering them to their intended recipients. This constant exposure to national events, to political debates, to different perspectives, and to the evolving discourse of the time sharpened his understanding of the broader political landscape and the significant national issues. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge from every available source, expanding his intellectual horizons far beyond the local village. It was here that he truly began to transition from a life predominantly defined by strenuous manual labor to one increasingly focused on intellectual pursuits, civic engagement, and the nascent beginnings of a professional career. The village provided him with a variety of opportunities that had been largely scarce in his more isolated frontier youth. His first significant employment in New Salem was as a clerk in Denton Offutt's general store. This position allowed him to engage directly and consistently with a wide array of people, farmers, tradesmen, travelers, and other villagers. He observed the daily mechanics of local commerce, learned about managing inventory, the precise handling of money, the intricate nuances of customer service, and the dynamics of local exchange. He quickly developed a remarkable reputation for his scrupulous honesty, a quality that earned him the enduring moniker, Honest Abe. Numerous anecdotes from this specific period underscore this distinctive trait. One widely circulated story recounts him walking several miles to return a mere few cents to a customer who had been accidentally overcharged by a small margin. Another popular tale tells of him meticulously measuring out cloth for a customer and then realizing after the customer had departed that he had inadvertently given her a slightly smaller amount than requested. He immediately closed the store and walked directly to her home to deliver the precise, correct amount. These small yet significant acts built a powerful and lasting reputation for unimpeachable integrity, a reputation that would serve him well in his future endeavors. Beyond his primary role as a store clerk, Lincoln undertook other varied and practical occupations in New Salem. Another profoundly important role he undertook during this New Salem period was that of a surveyor. It was during his 6 years in New Salem that Abraham Lincoln's political ambitions began to truly awaken and emerge. Despite his efforts, he lost this first election to the General Assembly, finishing 8th in a field of 13 candidates. Chapter 7: Legislative Years in Illinois and the Practice of Law. Abraham Lincoln's political career truly began to gain momentum with his successful election to the Illinois General Assembly in the year 1834. He would serve as a representative for 4 consecutive terms, spanning a significant period from 1834 through 1842. During this period of legislative service, he meticulously represented Sangamon County, a large and continuously growing district in central Illinois. He very quickly established himself as a diligent and remarkably thoughtful legislator and an increasingly effective debater within the confines of the State House. It was envisioned to provide a uniform national currency and to effectively regulate credit. A protective tariff was another core Whig economic policy consistently advocated by Lincoln. He moved from the comparatively small and rural village of New Salem to Springfield, Illinois, which had recently been officially designated as the new state capital, and well-respected local attorney and a former mentor who had encouraged Lincoln to pursue the study of law. His civil docket included intricate land ownership disputes, which were common in a rapidly developing frontier state, detailed contract disagreements, difficult. This involved long and often arduous journeys on horseback or by rudimentary buggy from one county courthouse to another, often spending weeks away from his home and his family, and critically, for his unimpeachable honesty and absolute integrity in all his legal dealings, for his compelling rhetorical abilities in presenting a complex legal case to juries and judges. He was renowned for his ethical practice and for advising clients against frivolous lawsuits or unethical legal tactics. He built a solid and widely respected reputation as an attorney, as an ethical practitioner, and as a firm-minded, yet determined, advocate for his clients. His legal career was not only successful, providing him with a stable and comfortable income, but also provided him with a growing and invaluable network of contacts and relationships throughout the entire state. These professional relationships proved invaluable in his subsequent political endeavors. This period of steady and continuous professional growth and increasing public recognition marked a quiet, yet intensely focused, time for the man from Illinois. The sounds of courtroom debates, the rustle of legal papers, and the rhythmic clip-clop of horse hooves on the circuit road were all part of this steady accumulation of experience and reputation. These continuous travels exposed him to an even wider range of legal issues from different counties, and to a remarkably diverse array of people from all social strata: farmers, merchants, laborers, and landowners. This constant interaction with ordinary citizens in various legal contexts deepened his understanding of the lives and concerns of the common people, and often sensitive debt collection cases and private family matters, including divorce and probate cases. He also diligently handled numerous criminal cases, zealously defending individuals accused of various offenses ranging from petty theft to more serious violent crimes. He appeared regularly before both local juries and circuit court judges. This partnership formally marked the official beginning of his dedicated and focused legal practice in the capital city. This strategic move was undeniably crucial for his burgeoning legal career and his escalating political aspirations. Springfield, as the capital, offered considerably more opportunities for both professional advancement and political networking. This tariff was specifically designed to encourage and to rigorously protect nascent domestic manufacturing industries by strategically making imported foreign goods more expensive for consumers, thus fostering the growth of American industry, creating domestic jobs, and promoting national economic self-sufficiency. Lincoln consistently aligned himself with these foundational Whig economic and developmental positions, demonstrating a clear and consistent political philosophy. Lincoln was a committed and active member of the Whig Party, one of the two major political parties dominating the American political landscape during that specific historical era. He meticulously learned the intricate mechanisms of the political process, gaining a deep understanding of how legislative bills were introduced, how they were rigorously debated, how they were amended, and how they eventually became law. He acquired a profound understanding of the complex machinery of state governance. This extensive period of service in the legislature, which spanned nearly a decade, served as an invaluable and hands-on apprenticeship in public service. It provided him with crucial, practical experience in policymaking, in coalition building, in understanding legislative strategy, and in mastering parliamentary procedure. All of these experiences were essential in effectively preparing him for future, and much more, prominent roles on a significantly larger national stage. It was during these legislative years that his reputation as a thoughtful, capable, and principled politician began to undeniably solidify and extend beyond his immediate local district. The Whigs, as a political entity, generally advocated for a set of core policies, primarily aimed at robust national economic development and greater national integration through systematic infrastructure improvements. Key Whig principles that Lincoln consistently supported and actively championed included internal improvements. These were comprehensive infrastructure projects designed to facilitate and accelerate economic growth. They encompassed the construction of canals intended to create more efficient waterways for trade, the building of new, more extensive road networks to connect disparate communities and improve overland transportation, and the ambitious development of nascent railroad systems, which were seen as revolutionary for improving the speed and efficiency of transportation networks. These large-scale projects were viewed by the Whigs as absolutely vital to stimulate regional and national economic growth to significantly reduce transportation costs for goods and people, which prominent Whig economists and politicians believed would provide crucial stability to the nation's often volatile financial system, and to facilitate the much-needed movement of raw materials, manufactured products, and human capital throughout the expansive state, and ultimately across the entire nation. And his developing ability to logically construct and persuasively articulate his arguments. He also consistently supported the establishment of a national bank. He engaged actively and often eloquently in numerous legislative debates within the Illinois General Assembly, regularly displaying his keen intellect, his growing rhetorical skills. In the year 1837, Lincoln undertook a significant personal and professional relocation. Upon arriving in Springfield, he immediately entered into a law partnership with John T. Stuart, a highly prominent. His legal practice was exceptionally varied and remarkably robust. He represented a diverse array of clients in a multitude of complex cases before various state and local courts. He traveled extensively as a quintessential circuit rider, following the established judicial circuit across central Illinois. He very quickly developed a significant and widespread reputation for his exceptional clarity of reasoning, for his logical and highly persuasive arguments. Chapter 8: Marriage, Early Family Life, and Congressional Term. Abraham Lincoln eventually married Mary Todd on November 4, 1842. The wedding ceremony took place in Springfield, Illinois. Mary Todd hailed from a prominent and undeniably influential family from Lexington, Kentucky. Her father, Robert S. Todd, was a well-respected banker and a legislator in Kentucky. Her family possessed significant social standing and extensive political connections both in Kentucky and in broader national circles. He was the only one of their 4 children to survive to adulthood and live a long and prominent life. He later served as Secretary of War and as the U.S. Ambassador to the United Kingdom. 1850. He was described as a remarkably bright and lively child, possessing an inquisitive mind and a cheerful disposition. 1853. He was known for his spirited nature, his playful personality, and his often mischievous antics. The constant and heavy weight of grief and sadness continuously bore down on them a series of private tragedies, often unseen and largely unknown by the broader public, amidst their increasingly public and prominent lives. He suffered from a speech impediment and had a somewhat irregular and unconventional education. Tad provided much-needed moments of joy and welcome distraction to Lincoln during the incredibly dark and demanding days of the war years, after which he returned to his private law practice in Springfield, Illinois, and to the relative quiet of his family life for several years. He did not seek re-election to Congress, perhaps due to the unpopularity of his anti-war stance, or a conscious decision to focus more intensely on his growing legal career and his young family. This period of congressional service, however brief, provided him with a deeper and more nuanced understanding of federal governance, of complex national political dynamics, and of the intricate interplay between legislative action and executive power. It was a time of intense observation and significant learning on the national stage, which would prove invaluable in preparing him for his later, more pivotal and transformative role as President of the United States. This was a quiet period of national exposure and personal family growth, with the sounds of Washington, D.C. and the bustling halls of Congress marking a brief yet important chapter. He tragically died at the age of 18 on July 15, 1871, 6 years after his father's assassination. He was deeply beloved by both his parents. He died at the age of 11 on February 20, 1862. While Lincoln was serving as president and the family resided in the White House, he served a single term in the U.S. Congress, from December 6, 1847 to March 3, 1849. His tenure in Congress was relatively brief, but it provided him with invaluable national experience and a first-hand understanding of federal legislative processes. During this period, he resided in a boarding house in Washington, D.C., while Mary and their young children, Robert and Eddie, remained primarily in Springfield for much of this period, traveling to Washington for brief visits. His death occurred during a critical and deeply challenging phase of the unfolding Civil War. It utterly devastated Mary Lincoln, plunging her into a prolonged period of inconsolable grief and often outspoken opposition to the Mexican-American War, which had been initiated by President James K. Polk, a Democrat. Believing the war was an aggressive act primarily designed to expand the territory available for slavery, a cause he fundamentally opposed. Lincoln openly criticized President Polk for what he perceived as an unjustified initiation of the conflict. He famously introduced what became known as the Spot Resolution, a legislative challenge demanding that President Polk precisely identify the exact spot on American soil where American blood had supposedly been shed as a justification for the declaration of war. This was a courageous and ethically motivated stand, though it proved to be unpopular with many of his constituents back in Illinois, who largely supported the war, and with the powerful and influential Polk administration, and it deeply affected Abraham, adding an almost unbearable layer of immense-laced personal sorrow to his already overwhelming wartime burdens and responsibilities. He tragically died at the tender age of 3 years old. On February 1, 1850, his death was a profound source of immense grief for both parents. These connections provided Lincoln with access to different social circles and further exposure to the political elites of the time. 1846. But it particularly devastated Mary Lincoln, contributing significantly to her later emotional fragility. The marriage itself was often described as tumultuous, marked by periods of profound affection, deep mutual respect, and shared intellectual interests, but also by periods of intense strain and emotional difficulty due to their differing temperaments, Mary's often volatile moods, and the devastating personal tragedies that would later afflict them as a family. Together, Abraham and Mary Lincoln had 4 sons, all of whom were born in their home in Springfield, Illinois. Their first son, Robert Todd Lincoln, was born on August 1, 1843. Their second son, Edward Baker Lincoln, affectionately called Eddie by the family, was born on March 10th. Their third son, William Wallace Lincoln, known universally as Willie, was born on December 21st. Their fourth and youngest son, Thomas Lincoln, affectionately called Tad by his father, was born on April 4th. The recurring and devastating loss of his children was a source of profound and enduring personal sorrow for both Abraham and Mary throughout their respective lives. In the year 1847, Abraham Lincoln was successfully elected to the United States House of Representatives, representing the 7th Congressional District of Illinois. During his single term in Congress, he gained a degree of national attention for his principled. His single term in national politics was a brief, yet significant interlude in his overall life. Chapter 9. Retreat to Law and the Seeds of Re-engagement. Following the conclusion of his single term in the U.S. House of Representatives in March of 1849, Abraham Lincoln made a deliberate and conscious decision to withdraw from the direct and demanding arena of national politics. He immersed himself fully in the practice of law, returning to his familiar routines as a circuit rider. He heard their disputes, listened to their concerns, and observed the daily lives of ordinary citizens. He remained connected to the political currents of the day, reading newspapers and discussing current events with fellow lawyers and community leaders. This legislation, introduced by Senator Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois, proposed a radical shift in national policy regarding slavery in the territories. It explicitly repealed the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which had previously prohibited slavery north of the 3,630 parallel in the vast Louisiana Purchase territory. He felt a deep compulsion to speak out more forcefully, more consistently, and more articulately against the unbridled expansion of slavery. He began to argue not as an immediate or radical abolitionist advocating for immediate nationwide emancipation, but as a determined and principled opponent of slavery's spread. He held the unshakable conviction that if slavery could be successfully contained within its existing boundaries, it would eventually and inevitably wither away and ultimately perish. He firmly believed that the nation could not long endure permanently half slave and permanently half free, a profoundly divided house, incapable of standing for long. The quiet years of law practice were now giving way to a renewed and passionate engagement with the defining moral and political struggle of his generation. The stillness of the courtroom was giving way to the rising sounds of national debate. Instead, it championed the principle of popular sovereignty. This doctrine allowed the white residents of the new territories of Kansas and Nebraska to decide for themselves through local elections whether to permit or prohibit slavery within their own territorial borders. He was still a Whig, but the Whig Party itself was beginning to unravel, fracturing over the increasingly contentious issue of slavery and other sectional disputes. The Compromise of 1850, while temporarily diffusing some tensions, had introduced the Fugitive Slave Act, which was deeply unpopular in the North and further exacerbated sectional divisions. This constant interaction with the populace and his keen observation of human nature deepened his understanding of the social and economic fabric of Illinois and, indeed, of the broader American society. His legal practice covered a vast array of cases, from complex land disputes to simple debt collections, from family matters to criminal defense. He viewed it as a dangerous betrayal of core American principles, an egregious affront to the concept of liberty, and a significant and alarming step towards the nationalization of slavery, which he believed was morally wrong, economically backward, and fundamentally antithetical to the ideals of the Founding Fathers. He saw it as an existential threat to the very foundations of the Republic and its future as a truly free society. He became known for his thorough preparation, his clear and logical argumentation, his fairness, and his unwavering honesty. He gained a reputation not just as a skilled attorney, but as a man of integrity and common sense. He traveled extensively across central Illinois, following the 8th Judicial Circuit from one county courthouse to another. These journeys were often arduous, involving long days of travel on horseback or in a buggy, through all kinds of weather and over rough, unpaved roads. He would spend weeks away from his home in Springfield, staying in simple taverns or boarding houses in the various county seats along the circuit. He did not seek re-election to Congress. This choice was influenced by several factors. His principled opposition to the Mexican-American War, while admired by some, had proved unpopular with a significant portion of his constituents in Illinois. Furthermore, his legal practice had been largely put on hold during his time in Washington, and he needed to re-establish it to ensure a steady income for his growing family. For the next several years, roughly from 1849 to 1854, Lincoln dedicated himself primarily and intensely to his legal career. During these circuit travels, he engaged with a wide and diverse range of people: farmers, merchants, laborers, landowners, and other lawyers and judges. While he focused intensely on his law practice, Lincoln did not entirely abandon his interest in politics. However, Lincoln's true political reawakening was not fully sparked until the year 1854, with the introduction of the highly controversial Kansas-Nebraska Act. For Lincoln, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was not merely a political dispute. it was a profound moral outrage. This controversial act undeniably re-energized his political interest with a renewed and urgent fervor. Chapter 10. The Rise of the Republican Party and the House Divided. Speech: the political turmoil ignited by the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 had profound and irreversible consequences for the American political landscape. It shattered the existing party system and led directly to the rise of new political alignments. The venerable Whig Party, to which Abraham Lincoln had faithfully belonged, fractured irrevocably and ultimately collapsed, unable to reconcile its internal divisions over the intractable issue of slavery and its expansion. He articulated his arguments with remarkable clarity and rigorous logical precision. He criticized Stephen Douglas, his longtime political rival, for abandoning the principles of the Founding Fathers, who, Lincoln argued, had intended for slavery to eventually die out. On March 6, 1857, the United States Supreme Court issued its landmark and deeply controversial decision in the case of Dred Scott v. Sanford. This ruling was widely anticipated, and its repercussions were immediate, far-reaching, and profoundly unsettling. It effectively overturned decades of legislative compromise on the contentious issue of slavery in the territories and effectively opened all federal territories to the institution of slavery, regardless of popular sovereignty or prior legislative acts. For Abraham Lincoln, the decision was deeply alarming. He saw it as a dangerous sum. Critics, particularly from the Democratic Party, accused Lincoln of being an extremist, of advocating for sectional conflict, and even of secretly seeking to abolish slavery outright. Despite his careful wording, which focused explicitly on the spread of slavery, not its immediate abolition in existing states. However, for many in the newly formed Republican Party and across the northern states, the speech resonated deeply. It articulated their collective fears and gave powerful voice to their profound moral opposition to slavery's expansion. It solidified Lincoln's position as a leading figure and a profound moral voice in the burgeoning Republican Party, and it undeniably set the stage for his famous and consequential debates with Stephen Douglas, which would begin shortly thereafter. This was a period of escalating tension and clarifying moral choices for the nation, a quiet transformation of the political landscape, and a clear articulation of destiny. The very sounds of impending conflict were beginning to echo throughout the land, an alarming expansion of the peculiar institution and a direct threat to the very idea of a nation founded on the principles of liberty. He believed the decision undermined the moral foundations of the Republic and gravely threatened to nationalize slavery, making it potentially legal everywhere in every state. He meticulously contrasted the Declaration of Independence's promise of fundamental equality with the ongoing expansion of slavery. This speech was a powerful and deeply prophetic warning, a stark and uncompromising articulation of the fundamental and seemingly irreconcilable conflict that was inexorably facing the nation. Lincoln argued that the nation could not indefinitely exist with such a fundamental moral and political contradiction at its very core, or its persistent advocates would push it further until it became lawful and omnipresent in all the states. He framed the conflict not as a temporary disagreement or a minor political squabble. He suggested that either the opponents of slavery would eventually succeed in halting its further spread and placing it on a definitive path to ultimate extinction, north as well as south, but as a fundamental and existential struggle over the very soul of the nation. He famously declared with a calm yet powerful voice. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved, do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. The Supreme Court, under Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, issued a complex ruling with several key and profoundly impactful points. First, the court ruled that African Americans, whether enslaved or free, could not be American citizens and therefore had no standing to sue in federal court. This effectively stripped Black Americans of any meaningful legal rights under the Constitution. Second, the court declared the Missouri Compromise of 1820 unconstitutional, asserting that Congress lacked the power to prohibit slavery in any federal territory, effectively stating that slaveholders had a constitutional right to take their property, including enslaved people, into any territory. Third, the court stated that temporary residence in a free state or territory did not make an enslaved person free. He appealed directly to the moral conscience of the nation. These speeches marked a significant and sustained return to active political life for Lincoln after several years, primarily focusing on his legal practice. The Democratic Party also experienced deep and lasting schisms between its northern and southern wings, further exacerbating the national sectional divide, and anti-slavery settlers clashed brutally and repeatedly in what became infamously known as Bleeding Kansas. This violent conflict starkly underscored the inherent dangers and the explosive nature of the doctrine of popular sovereignty and revealed the profound depth of the national crisis. It galvanized anti-slavery forces across the North and provided tangible evidence of the destructive potential of slavery's expansion. This period saw the rapid emergence of the Republican Party, a new and dynamic political force formed in the mid-1850s, primarily on an explicitly anti-slavery expansion platform. It quickly attracted a diverse coalition of disillusioned former Whigs, such as Abraham Lincoln himself, dedicated free soilers who sought to prevent slavery in new territories, and a segment of disaffected anti-Kansas-Nebraska Act Democrats who were appalled by the repeal of the Missouri Compromise. Lincoln quickly joined the nascent ranks of this new party, recognizing it as the most effective and principled vehicle for opposing the spread of slavery and for upholding the fundamental principles of a free society. He rapidly emerged as one of its most prominent and articulate leaders in Illinois and increasingly on the national stage. He consistently advocated for the principles of free labor, a core tenet of Republican ideology. This concept promoted individual economic opportunity for all free men, encouraged westward expansion into new territories, but crucially, without the blight of chattel slavery. He envisioned a nation where free labor was honored, where hard work and individual initiative were justly rewarded, and where individuals could rise through their own merit and sustained effort. This vision stood in stark philosophical and economic contrast to the system of unfree labor, embodied and perpetuated by chattel slavery, which he viewed as morally repugnant and economically inefficient. His vision was of a truly free society based on opportunity, the dignity of honest toil, and the fundamental equality of all men. Lincoln engaged in numerous speeches and public debates across Illinois in vigorous response to the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the ongoing national crisis. The turmoil caused by the Kansas-Nebraska Act led directly to widespread violence in the Kansas Territory as pro-slavery. The year 1857 brought a new and significant blow to the anti-slavery cause, and further intensified the national crisis over slavery. Dred Scott was an enslaved African-American man who had sued for his freedom, arguing that he had resided with his master in free territories and therefore should be legally considered free. The Dred Scott decision was a profound and deeply satisfying victory for pro-slavery forces and a devastating setback for anti-slavery advocates. In response to the Dred Scott decision and the ongoing national crisis, Lincoln delivered his iconic and profoundly resonant House Divided speech on June 16, 1858, at the Illinois Republican State Convention in Springfield. This powerfully prophetic statement foresaw the inevitable and violent collision between the free states and the slave states, a collision that would ultimately lead directly to the cataclysmic Civil War. The House Divided speech, while electrifying to many supporters, was also controversial. Chapter 11: The Lincoln-Douglas Debates and National Recognition. The year 1858 was unequivocally dominated by the series of 7 widely anticipated and highly publicized debates between Abraham Lincoln and the formidable Senator Stephen A. Douglas. Both men were engaged in a spirited and intensely scrutinized contest for a coveted U.S. Senate seat representing the state of Illinois. 1858. The specific locations included Ottawa on August 21st, Freeport on August 27th, Jonesboro on September 15th, Charleston on September 18th, Galesburg on October 7th, Quincy on October 13th, and finally Alton on October 15th. He argued with rigorous logic that popular sovereignty, as espoused by Douglas Lincoln, posed a direct and strategically incisive question to Douglas, which became historically known as the Freeport question. He pointedly asked Douglas whether the people of a U.S. territory could in any lawful way exclude slavery from its limits prior to the formation of a state constitution. He meticulously highlighted the fundamental inconsistency between Douglas's fervent appeal to popular sovereignty and the Supreme Court's clear and unambiguous ruling that territories could not legally prohibit slavery. These debates were extensively reported by numerous newspapers across the entire nation, and complete transcripts were widely published and eagerly consumed by an increasingly engaged and anxious populace. They elevated Lincoln's national profile to an unprecedented degree. Even though he ultimately lost the Senate race to Douglas, senators were at that time chosen by state legislatures, and the Democratic Party controlled the Illinois legislature. Lincoln gained widespread and lasting recognition as an exceptionally powerful and deeply thoughtful orator, as a clear and remarkably articulate voice on the most pressing moral and political issue of the day: the future and the profoundly divisive nature of slavery in America. His stature as a national political figure grew immensely, setting the crucial stage for his subsequent and ultimately successful presidential bid. This was a period of intense intellectual combat and undeniable rising national prominence for the quiet man from Illinois. The sounds of fervent crowds and the methodical cadence of debate all contributed to a swelling national awareness of a singular voice. This question was meticulously designed by Lincoln to expose the inherent and irreconcilable contradiction between Douglas's cherished doctrine of popular sovereignty and the recent and highly controversial Dred Scott Supreme Court decision, which had explicitly ruled that Congress lacked the constitutional power to prohibit slavery in any federal territory. Was a fundamentally flawed and morally indefensible doctrine, because it allowed for the potential spread of a great and undeniable moral evil into regions previously designated as free. He steadfastly maintained that the nation's founders had initially viewed slavery as a temporary institution that should, with time and effort, eventually die out. He reiterated his firm belief that the nation could not long endure permanently half slave and permanently half free, as he had famously declared in his preceding House divided speech. He framed the issue not merely as a matter of policy, but as a fundamental moral question. Each debate meticulously followed a prearranged and carefully structured format. One candidate opened the proceedings with a substantial 60-minute speech. The opposing candidate then responded with a lengthier 90-minute speech, and the first candidate closed with a concise 30-minute rebuttal. Despite the Supreme Court's pronouncement, local communities in the territories could, in practice, effectively exclude slavery through the implementation of unfriendly legislation, or by simply failing to pass the necessary local police regulations required to protect slave property. This structured format allowed for sustained, in-depth argumentation and detailed exposition on the critical and profoundly divisive issues of the day, providing ample time for both sides to present their complete cases to the assembled audiences, who fiercely demanded explicit federal protection for slavery in all territories, further fracturing the already deeply divided Democratic Party along irreconcilable sectional lines. He attempted to intricately reconcile his political position with the Supreme Court's definitive Dred Scott ruling by artfully asserting that, in essence, he argued that while slavery could not be legally prohibited by territorial legislatures, it could be practically prevented from taking root by the hostile actions or deliberate inaction of a territorial legislature. This nuanced and somewhat circuitous position, while it successfully satisfied his immediate Illinois constituents and significantly helped him secure victory in the Senate election, simultaneously and ironically alienated a substantial number of powerful Southern Democrats. Douglas, universally known as the Little Giant, due to his diminutive stature but immense political power, was a veritable political titan, an influential national figure, a leading and eloquent proponent of the doctrine of popular sovereignty, and an undeniably formidable orator, possessing a powerful and charismatic speaking style. Lincoln, though well regarded and increasingly recognized in Illinois, was, at this juncture, less known nationally, particularly its ongoing status and its potential expansion into the vast and newly acquired Western territories. But he emerged from these debates as an exceptionally powerful and remarkably articulate challenger to Douglas's political dominance. The 7 debates took place in 7 different congressional districts across the expansive state of Illinois, spanning a concentrated period from August 21st to October 15th. The central and pervasive theme of all 7 debates was the complex and increasingly volatile issue of slavery. Douglas consistently championed his central doctrine of popular sovereignty, arguing with unwavering conviction that the white residents of the territories should possess the inherent right to decide for themselves through direct democratic vote whether to legally allow or to explicitly prohibit slavery within their own territorial limits without any interference from the federal Congress. He presented this as the most democratic and equitable solution, a pragmatic way to remove the intensely contentious issue from the fraught arena of national politics and to devolve decision-making to the local level. Lincoln, in contrast, methodically articulated his strong and unwavering opposition to the expansion of slavery. A particularly pivotal and memorable moment occurred during the second debate, held in Freeport, Illinois. Douglas's response to this shrewd query became famously known as the Freeport Doctrine. Lincoln, with his sharp intellect and his profound grasp of logical argument, seized upon the inherent contradictions and the underlying logical fallacies in Douglas's elaborate argument. Chapter 12: The Road to the Presidency and the 1860 Election. Following the conclusion of the highly publicized Lincoln-Douglas debates in the autumn of 1858, Abraham Lincoln continued to maintain a vigorous and active public schedule. He traveled extensively and delivered numerous speeches, not only across the expanse of the Midwest, but gradually extending his reach to the influential centers of the East Coast. Although he had, in the end, narrowly lost the U.S. Senate race to Stephen A. Douglas, this speech was a meticulously researched and brilliantly argued defense of the Republican Party's precise stance on slavery and its constitutional underpinnings. He was increasingly seen as a strong and increasingly viable contender for the Republican nomination. The convention site, a large, hastily constructed wooden building known as the Wigwam, was packed with delegates and enthusiastic spectators. Lincoln's dedicated supporters worked tirelessly and with great skill to secure his nomination. Through shrewd political maneuvering, strategic alliances, and effective grassroots organization, on the third ballot, after initial ballots favored Seward, Abraham Lincoln was ultimately nominated as the Republican Party's official candidate for President of the United States. His triumph was almost entirely based on overwhelming support from the northern and western states. He won a clear majority of the electoral votes, but only a plurality of the popular vote. This was a truly remarkable and improbable achievement for a man who just 2 years prior had been primarily known as a successful but regional Illinois lawyer. At this point, he was still considered somewhat of a dark horse candidate compared to more prominent and established Republican figures such as William H. Seward of New York. There were 4 major candidates on the ballot: Abraham Lincoln, representing the Republican Party, advocating for the non-extension of slavery; Stephen A. Douglas, representing the splintered Northern Democratic Party, still championing his doctrine of popular sovereignty; John C. Breckinridge, representing the Southern Democratic Party, representing the Constitutional Union Party, advocating explicitly for federal protection of slavery in the territories; and John Bell, which sought to avoid the contentious slavery issue altogether, and instead focus solely on preserving the Union and upholding the Constitution without addressing the underlying cause of division. A leading statesman, Salmon P. Chase of Ohio, a former governor and senator, and Edward Bates of Missouri, a well-respected legal mind, Lincoln conducted a largely front porch campaign, remaining in Springfield, Illinois, and making no formal, extensive speeches or grand campaign tours. He relied instead on surrogates who spoke on his behalf and on the widespread distribution of the published texts of his past speeches, especially the powerful Cooper Union Address and the widely read transcripts of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. His platform was explicitly clear and consistently articulated. He firmly opposed the expansion of slavery into any new federal territories, while simultaneously pledging to protect the existing institution of slavery in the southern states where it was already legally established. This was a pragmatic political position designed to appeal to a broad coalition of voters in the North and West while holding firm on the non-extension principle, which was the core of the Republican platform and its moral foundation. However, Lincoln possessed several distinct advantages. He was from a crucial and politically vital swing state, Illinois, which was essential for electoral victory. He had cultivated a powerful reputation for unimpeachable honesty. Honest Abe. He possessed a compelling and relatable life story, from his truly humble origins to his self-made success, and crucially, his carefully articulated, moderate stance on slavery, opposing its expansion but not its immediate abolition. That a significant majority of them had, in various ways, supported Congress's inherent power to restrict slavery in the federal territories, made him a more electable candidate for a truly national election in comparison to some of the more radical Republicans whose views on abolition might alienate crucial moderate voters. Lincoln systematically reviewed the historical opinions of the 39 signers of the United States Constitution, demonstrating, through painstaking historical analysis, he directly and effectively countered the pervasive Southern claim that the Founding Fathers had specifically intended for slavery to be protected everywhere, and that Congress had no authority over the institution. The speech was a powerful and undeniable demonstration of his rigorous intellectual discipline, his deep and nuanced understanding of constitutional history, and his exceptional and persuasive rhetorical skills. It profoundly impressed the influential and sophisticated audience in the heart of the East Coast establishment. Many who heard it, or later read its published text and state politician, into a figure of undeniable national prominence and a leading articulate voice within the rapidly expanding and increasingly powerful Republican Party, later described it as a transformative experience, making them realize Lincoln's profound potential as a national leader, possessing both intellect and integrity. His remarkable performance during the debates had profoundly transformed him from a relatively obscure Illinois lawyer. The complete transcripts of the 7 debates were meticulously published and widely distributed, eagerly read by an engaged populace across the entire country. Stephen A. Douglas, allowing a much broader national audience to directly engage with his carefully reasoned arguments against the expansion of slavery and for the preservation of free labor. In the autumn of 1859, Lincoln embarked upon a significant speaking tour in the critical swing state of Ohio, where he again found himself debating his familiar rival. These renewed encounters further burnished his national reputation as a formidable and thoughtful orator, and as a clear exponent of Republican principles. He consistently articulated his nuanced and unwavering position on slavery. He firmly opposed its further expansion into any new federal territories. Lincoln's presidential candidacy gained significant and undeniable momentum, but he pragmatically acknowledged the existing constitutional protections for slavery where it was already legally established in the Southern states. He meticulously emphasized that the Republican Party was not an abolitionist party, advocating for immediate and universal emancipation, but rather was fundamentally opposed to the spread of slavery into free territories. This was a crucial and often repeated distinction designed to appeal to a broad spectrum of moderate voters in the North and West, who might be wary of immediate abolitionism. A truly pivotal moment in his arduous journey to the presidency occurred on February 27, 1860, when Lincoln delivered his now famous and profoundly impactful Cooper Union Address in New York City. After the resounding success of the Cooper Union Address, the Republican National Convention was held in Chicago in May of 1860. The 1860 presidential election was intensely contested and profoundly divisive, reflecting the deep and seemingly irreconcilable sectional splits that plagued the country. The issue of slavery, its expansion, its legal status, its very future, completely overshadowed and unequivocally defined the entire campaign. It was the singular, dominant issue. Lincoln won the presidential election on November 6, 1860. His victory was achieved without securing a single electoral vote from any Southern state. Chapter 13. Lincoln's Inauguration and the Onset of War. Following Abraham Lincoln's election to the presidency in November 1860, the nation found itself in a state of profound and unprecedented crisis. This period, often referred to as the Secession Winter, was marked by a rapid. Lincoln arrived in the capital on February 23, 1861, under a cloak of secrecy, a somber foreshadowing of the immense perils that lay ahead. The atmosphere in Washington was incredibly tense, with rumors of plots and widespread anxiety about the future of the Republic. The immediate flashpoint became Fort Sumter, a federal fort located strategically within the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina, a state that had been the first to secede. He deliberately informed the governor of South Carolina of his intentions, aiming to demonstrate that the mission was purely humanitarian. This was the exact moment the American Civil War began. The bombardment lasted for approximately 34 hours. The small Union garrison, severely outmatched and outgunned, and facing starvation, consequently, for more crucial states, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee, quickly followed the lead of the Deep South states and formally declared their secession from the Union, joining the newly formed Confederate States of America. The lines of conflict were now undeniably and irrevocably drawn. The peaceful hope of Lincoln's inauguration was shattered, replaced by the grim reality of a nation plunged into the most destructive and agonizing conflict in its entire history. The quiet hopes of peace were drowned out by the rising crescendo of war, the sounds of cannon fire replacing the calls for unity. Was ultimately forced to surrender the fort on April 13th. Remarkably, no lives were lost during the actual bombardment, though one Union soldier was killed in an accidental explosion during the surrender ceremonies. However, the Confederate government, under the leadership of President Jefferson Davis, perceived any attempt to provision the fort as an intolerable act of war against their new nation. The small Union garrison at Fort Sumter, under the command of Major Robert Anderson, was isolated, surrounded by Confederate batteries, and rapidly running low on critical supplies. Lincoln faced an immediate and agonizing decision to resupply the fort, which the Confederacy might interpret as an act of aggression, or to withdraw, which would be seen as an acknowledgement of Confederate sovereignty and a significant concession to rebellion. It unequivocally united Northern public opinion behind the Union cause. What had previously been a political dispute over secession and slavery now transformed into full-scale armed rebellion against the legitimate authority of the United States. Lincoln's response was swift and decisive. On April 15, 1861, he issued a presidential proclamation calling for 75,000 volunteers from the state militias to serve for 90 days to suppress the insurrection. He declared that an insurrection too powerful to be suppressed by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings existed, an escalating series of events that ultimately led the country to the brink of civil war. The address was delivered before a large crowd, under the watchful eyes of armed guards, and with sharpshooters positioned on nearby rooftops, a visible testament to the profound instability of the moment. In his speech, he began by reaffirming that he had no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. A deliberate attempt to reassure the Southern states that his administration would not attack slavery in areas where it was already constitutionally protected. However, he then unequivocally declared that the union of these states is perpetual, and that no state upon its own mere motion can lawfully get out of the union. He viewed secession as anarchy and constitutionally impossible. He warned against violence, stating that in your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. He concluded with a poignant and hopeful appeal. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone, all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union. When again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. This address sought to conciliate while firmly asserting the Union's authority, a delicate balance in a time of extreme national division. Throughout these anxious months, Lincoln remained in Springfield, Illinois, carefully preparing for his assumption of the nation, his highest office, while closely observing the disintegration of the Union around him. He communicated primarily through carefully drafted statements and through discussions with key advisers, determined not to provoke further secession by any rash statements, yet equally determined not to compromise on the core principle of maintaining the Union. His journey to Washington, D.C. for his inauguration was undertaken amidst significant security concerns and threats of assassination. Lincoln's first inaugural address, delivered on March 4, 1861, from the East Portico of the U.S. Capitol, was a carefully crafted appeal for national unity and a firm assertion of federal authority. Despite Lincoln's earnest plea, the secession crisis escalated. After careful consideration and consultation with his newly formed cabinet, Lincoln made the difficult decision to send an unarmed supply mission to Fort Sumter, delivering only provisions, not reinforcements or additional arms. At precisely 4:30 a.m. on April 12, 1861, Confederate batteries ringing Charleston Harbor opened fire on Fort Sumter. The attack on Fort Sumter was a momentous and profoundly galvanizing event. This call to arms, while celebrated in the North, was viewed in the remaining Southern states that had not yet seceded as an act of war against their perceived sovereignty. Chapter 14: The Opening Shots of War and Lincoln's Evolving War Aims. The fragile and precarious peace that followed Lincoln's inauguration was tragically short-lived. The immediate crisis that gripped the nascent Lincoln administration centered intensely on the fate of federal forts which remained precariously located within the boundaries of the seceded states. The most prominent and immediately pressing of these was Fort Sumter, situated strategically in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. Major Anderson and his men were eventually forced to surrender the fort on April 13, 1861. Miraculously, there were no immediate casualties from the actual bombardment itself, though one Union soldier was later killed in an accidental explosion during the surrender ceremonies. He stated repeatedly and unequivocally that he fought not to abolish slavery immediately. While Lincoln did not initially declare that the war was being fought explicitly to end slavery, he understood implicitly that slavery was the fundamental root cause of the conflict, the very institution that divided the nation. Their allegiance was fragile and easily swayed. Lincoln had to carefully navigate policy to ensure these states remained firmly in the Union. Fearing that their secession would fatally weaken the federal cause both militarily and morally. This strategic restraint and political pragmatism influenced his initial approach to the issue of emancipation, as keeping these border states loyal was a paramount concern in the early months and throughout much of the conflict. He initially proposed compensated emancipation for these states, an offer of federal funds to emancipate their enslaved populations. But it was largely rejected by the border state legislatures. This strategic balancing act was a defining characteristic of his incredibly complex leadership in the early war years, a period of profound learning, immense frustration, and unrelenting pressure for the president as he grappled with the grim realities of total war, the complexities of military command, and the profound moral implications of the nation's defining conflict. The quiet, internal deliberations of a president against the loud, cacophonous backdrop of continuous conflict marked this time. As the war progressed, the question of slavery became increasingly prominent and increasingly unavoidable. Union commanders grappled with the complex issue of contraband slaves, those enslaved people who escaped and sought refuge behind Union lines. By 1862, Lincoln himself began to actively consider how emancipation could serve both a profound moral purpose and a critical military one, recognizing its strategic utility in crippling the Confederacy's war-making capacity. But to save the nation, to restore the constitutional government, he emphasized that the Union was perpetual and that secession was illegal and unconstitutional. He sought to demonstrate to the world that a government based on democratic principles could defend itself against internal insurrection and successfully maintain its integrity against those who would seek to destroy it. But the symbolic impact of the attack was immense. It was an undeniable act of open rebellion against the United States, a direct, unambiguous, and violent challenge to federal authority. The attack on Fort Sumter galvanized opinion across the entire North and united many who had previously been hesitant or undecided about military action against the seceded states. It transformed a political crisis into an undeniable military conflict. This fort, remaining stubbornly under Union control, was isolated, vulnerable, and desperately in need of resupply. Its garrison consisted of a mere 85 men under the command of Major Robert Anderson. On April 15, 1861, just 2 days after Sumter's surrender, he issued a presidential proclamation calling for 75,000 volunteers from the state militias to serve for 90 days to suppress the rebellion and to restore federal authority throughout the seceded states. He declared that a state of insurrection existed. This direct call for troops was seen by the remaining southern states, which had not yet seceded, as an unforgivable act of war, and it triggered a further wave of secession and historical importance. Seceded on April 17, 1861, followed by Arkansas on May 6, 1861, North Carolina on May 20th. This brought the total number of Confederate states to 11, 1861, and Tennessee on June 8th, Virginia, a crucial state with a large population, significant industrial capacity, thus provoking a military confrontation. 1861. The lines were now fully drawn. The nation was irrevocably and tragically at war, a civil war, brother fighting brother, American against American, a conflict of unprecedented scale and profound national consequence. Its very sounds, the roar of cannons and the marching of feet, echoed throughout the land. Lincoln faced a critical and agonizing dilemma. If he attempted to resupply the fort, it might be interpreted by the Confederacy as an overt act of aggression. If he chose to withdraw the troops, it would effectively acknowledge Confederate sovereignty over federal property as an act of invasion and an intolerable affront to their newly declared sovereignty, and fundamentally undermine the authority of the federal government over its own territory, a clear concession to rebellion. Lincoln ultimately decided, after much deliberation, to send an unarmed expedition consisting of provision ships to resupply Fort Sumter with essential food and medical supplies only. No additional troops, no additional munitions. He meticulously notified the governor of South Carolina of his peaceful intent and the limited nature of the resupply mission. However, the Confederate government, under President Jefferson Davis, viewed any attempt to resupply the fort, regardless of its unarmed nature. They ordered General P.G.T. Beauregard, commander of the Confederate forces in Charleston, to demand the fort's immediate surrender. When the Union commander, Major Robert Anderson, politely refused this demand, Confederate forces under Beauregard's command opened fire on Fort Sumter at precisely 4:30 a.m. on April 12, 1861. This was the precise moment the first shots of the American Civil War were irrevocably fired, signaling the tragic onset of the nation's bloodiest conflict. The bombardment lasted for 34 continuous hours. The Union garrison was significantly outmatched in terms of firepower and rapidly running critically low on supplies. Lincoln's response to the attack was swift and remarkably decisive. Lincoln's initial and overriding war aim was clear and singular: to preserve the Union. However, even at this relatively early stage, the issue of slavery was inextricably linked to the war effort. The border states, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri, which were slave states but importantly remained loyal to the Union, presented a particular and delicate challenge for Lincoln. Chapter 15: The Early Years of War and the Search for Generalship. The American Civil War, having commenced in April 1861, immediately presented Abraham Lincoln with a series of immense and unprecedented challenges of a scale and complexity previously unimaginable for any American president. His presidency, from this point forward, became inextricably linked with the direct conduct and ultimate outcome of the war. His primary and unwavering goal remained singularly focused: to preserve the Union, to restore the legitimate authority of the federal government over the rebellious states, and to demonstrate the enduring strength of the American Republic. Despite significantly outnumbering the Confederate forces under the brilliant leadership of Robert E. Lee, McClellan moved with agonizing slowness. He was often far more aggressive and decisive in his strategic thinking and his understanding of military necessity than many of his cautious and often hesitant commanders. The Radical Republicans were an increasingly vocal and influential faction in Congress. They consistently demanded a far more aggressive war policy and, crucially, an immediate and outright abolition of slavery. They harshly criticized Lincoln's cautious approach and his perceived leniency towards McClellan. They firmly believed that the war could not be truly won without striking directly and unequivocally at the fundamental institution of slavery, which they argued sustained the Confederacy's war-making capacity by providing the essential labor force. He instinctively recognized the critical need for continuous pressure on the enemy, for relentless pursuit after engagements, and for synchronized military movements across multiple fronts. These were slave states that, despite the pressures and the widespread Southern sentiment, importantly remained loyal to the Union, fatally weakening the federal cause both militarily and morally. Their continued allegiance was perceived as fragile and easily threatened. Lincoln understood implicitly that any premature or drastic action against slavery, such as immediate, uncompensated emancipation, could potentially push these crucial states into the Confederacy. He moved cautiously on the issue of emancipation, balancing profound moral considerations with paramount strategic, military, and political imperatives. He initially proposed compensated emancipation for these states, an offer of federal funds to emancipate their enslaved populations, but it was largely rejected by the border state legislatures. This strategic balancing act was a defining characteristic of his incredibly complex leadership in the early war years, a period of profound learning, immense frustration, and unrelenting pressure for the president as he grappled with the grim realities of total war, the complexities of military command, and the profound moral implications of the nation's defining conflict. The quiet internal deliberations of a president against the loud, cacophonous backdrop of continuous conflict marked this time. He constantly and urgently sought a general who possessed not only strategic insight, but also the will to fight and the determination to win. He attempted other commanders in the critical Eastern theater, such as Major General John Pope, who was decisively and humiliatingly defeated at the Second Battle of Bull Run in August 1862, a crushing blow to Union morale, and Major General Ambrose Burnside, who suffered a devastating and extremely costly defeat at the Battle of Fredericksburg in December 1862, a battle marked by suicidal frontal assaults. The persistent and often agonizing search for military competence and decisive action was a recurring and deeply troubling theme of these early war years, a constant source of presidential anguish and excessive deliberation, allowing the Confederates ample time to organize and establish a robust and effective defense, who had placed great hope in McClellan's perceived ability to end the war quickly and decisively. The campaign culminated in the 7 Days' Battles, a series of brutal and highly bloody engagements fought from June 25 to July 1, 1862. These battles forced McClellan to retreat from the very gates of Richmond, a strategic Union defeat and a major disappointment for Lincoln. This was a monumental and often overwhelming task, requiring leadership on a scale previously unknown in American history, and for which there was no direct precedent. The early years of the war, specifically the entirety of 1861 and much of 1862, were predominantly marked by significant and often frustrating military difficulties for the Union armies and a persistent yet largely unavailing search for truly effective generalship. The public in the North, and indeed Lincoln himself, initially and erroneously underestimated the deep resolve, the military prowess, and the inherent capability of the Confederate forces. They assumed a quick suppression of the rebellion. The very first major land battle of the war, the First Battle of Bull Run, fought on July 21, 1861, in Prince William County, Virginia, resulted in a decisive and demoralizing Confederate victory. This battle shattered the prevailing Northern illusions of a short and easily won war, and brought the grim reality of large-scale and brutal conflict to the immediate forefront. Union forces under Brigadier General Irvin McDowell were not only defeated, but were routed and retreated in disarray and confusion back to Washington, D.C., a clear and early sign of the immense and formidable task that lay ahead. Following the shocking defeat at Bull Run, Lincoln, in a major command decision, appointed Major General George B. McClellan to command the Army of the Potomac, which was the main Union army operating in the crucial eastern theater of the war. McClellan was, without question, a brilliant organizer, a meticulous trainer of troops, and possessed a remarkable ability to inspire confidence among his soldiers. He very quickly transformed the raw and often undisciplined volunteers from the early days of the war into a disciplined and seemingly formidable fighting force, a well-drilled and equipped army. However, McClellan also consistently proved to be excessively cautious, painstakingly slow to act, and extremely reluctant to engage in decisive, large-scale battle with the Confederate forces. His inherent slowness, his repeated and often exaggerated demands for more troops, more supplies, more logistical support, and his consistent overestimation of the enemy's strength frustrated Lincoln immensely and continuously. The Peninsular Campaign, which unfolded in the spring and early summer of 1862, was McClellan's major offensive operation, aimed strategically at capturing Richmond, Virginia, which served as the Confederate capital. Lincoln's frustration with his generals was palpable and consistently evident. Beyond the immediate military challenges, Lincoln also faced significant and often relentless political pressures from various factions within his own Republican Party. Lincoln also had to meticulously and carefully manage the delicate political situation regarding the border states, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. Chapter 16, The Emancipation Proclamation and the Turning Tide. The year 1863 marked a truly pivotal and ultimately decisive turning point in the course of the American Civil War and for Abraham Lincoln's presidency. After nearly 2 full years of brutal and increasingly costly conflict, characterized by mounting casualties and frequent Union setbacks, Lincoln fundamentally shifted the very nature and the core purpose of the ongoing war through the historic and transformative issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation, a document that would forever change the trajectory of the nation. An overriding goal was to preserve the Union, to restore the authority of the federal government over the rebellious states, not to immediately abolish slavery. While a tactical draw was strategically significant, as it halted Confederate General Robert E. Lee's invasion of Maryland, Lincoln issued a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. It declared with the full authority of the President of the United States that all enslaved people in the Confederate States. This created chaos and disruption within the Southern economy and diverted Confederate resources to managing the enslaved population. The Battle of Gettysburg, fought from July 1st to July 3rd, 1863, in Pennsylvania, was a decisive and bloody Union victory over General Robert E. Lee's formidable Army of Northern Virginia. It was a remarkably brief speech, consisting of fewer than 300 words, yet it was profoundly impactful in its meaning, possessing an enduring historical resonance and an unparalleled literary quality. It masterfully redefined the very purpose of the war, not merely as a fight to save the Union, but as a fundamental struggle to ensure that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. It solemnly rededicated the nation to the fundamental ideals of the Declaration of Independence, to the principles of equality, and to the pursuit of liberty for all. It stands as a timeless expression of American democracy, and its core foundational values a masterpiece of concise rhetoric, profound philosophical depth, and unwavering moral clarity. delivered at a truly pivotal moment, a time of immense sacrifice and a renewed sense of sacred purpose for the Union cause. The year 1863 was indeed the unmistakable turning point for the Union and for Lincoln's evolving vision of a truly free and united nation. The quiet sounds of a nation were now beginning to turn the tide of a long and bloody conflict. After initial Confederate successes on the first day of fighting the Union forces under the newly appointed Major General George Meade held strong defensive positions along Cemetery Ridge and Culp's Hill, and ultimately repelled Lee's aggressive and often desperate assaults, culminating in the catastrophic Pickett's charge on the third day. The Confederate defeat at Gettysburg marked the undeniable high-water mark of the Confederacy and definitively put an end to Lee's second and last major invasion of the North. It inflicted heavy and irreplaceable casualties on the Confederate Army, from which it never fully recovered in terms of manpower and offensive capability. Furthermore, it opened the door for African Americans, both free individuals from the North and formerly enslaved individuals from the South, to actively join the Union Army and Navy, adding vital and desperately needed manpower to the Union cause. Mississippi, 2 Union forces under the tenacious and brilliant leadership of Major General Ulysses S. Grant. The capture of Vicksburg gave the Union complete and undisputed control of the entire length of the Mississippi River, effectively splitting the Confederacy in two, severing its vital supply lines, and isolating the Confederate states west of the river. This was a critical and overwhelmingly strategic victory, further complementing the profound victory at Gettysburg and collectively signaling a significant shift in the momentum of the war in favor of the Union. Over 200,000 African American soldiers and sailors would eventually serve, many in segregated units, such as the courageous 54th Massachusetts Infantry. Their bravery, their unwavering determination, and their profound sacrifice played a critical and indispensable role in the ultimate Union victory. Morally, the Proclamation broadened the war's objectives, shifting its fundamental purpose from merely preserving the Union to also unequivocally ending slavery. It profoundly transformed the character of the war into a titanic struggle for human liberty and for the realization of America's founding ideals, a bold and truly revolutionary act that fundamentally changed the trajectory of the nation and its place in the world. The sounds of newfound freedom were beginning to echo across the fields of war, specifically in areas still designated as being in active rebellion against the United States government were thenceforth and forever free. It is important to note that the Proclamation notably did not apply to the crucial border states, such as Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri, which were slave states but importantly remained loyal to the Union. Nor did it apply to parts of the Confederacy that were already under Union control, such as Union-occupied New Orleans or parts of eastern Virginia, as Lincoln meticulously sought to maintain the fragile loyalty of those specific areas. The Proclamation was a multifaceted act, serving both as a strategic military maneuver designed to cripple the enemy and as a profound moral imperative, fulfilling a long-held conviction. This preliminary order was a stark and public warning to the Confederate States. It explicitly stated that if they did not return to the Union by the designated date of January 1st, 1863, all enslaved people within those rebellious states, in areas still inactive, rebellion against the United States would then be declared by presidential decree, thenceforward and forever free. This was a deliberate and strategically calculated move designed to give the Confederacy a final opportunity to end the war and to prepare public opinion in the North and among the border states for this radical and profoundly significant shift in federal policy. However, as the war progressed and as the human cost mounted, he increasingly recognized with growing clarity that slavery was not only the fundamental root cause of the entire conflict, but also a significant and crucial strategic asset for the Confederate States of America, providing the indispensable labor that sustained their agrarian economy and, critically, their military war effort. The profound moral argument against slavery, a cause he had long opposed, also weighed heavily on his deeply burdened conscience. He came to believe that the war could not truly be won or brought to a decisive conclusion without directly addressing and ultimately dismantling the institution of slavery itself. From the very beginning of the war in April 1861, Lincoln had consistently maintained that his singular, on September 22, 1862, following the Union victory at the Battle of Antietam, which the formal Emancipation Proclamation was officially issued on January 1, 1863, as scheduled. Militarily, the Emancipation Proclamation deprived the Confederacy of a crucial and indispensable labor force as enslaved people in areas touched by advancing Union armies could now legally escape and seek freedom behind Union lines. The year 1863 also witnessed two other major and profoundly decisive turning points in the military course of the war. Simultaneously, in the crucial Western theater, the long and arduous siege of Vicksburg concluded successfully on July 4, 1863. The very next day after Gettysburg, with the surrender of the heavily fortified Confederate stronghold of Vicksburg. Following these pivotal victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg, Lincoln delivered the immortal Gettysburg Address on November 19, 1863, at the solemn dedication ceremony of the Soldiers' National Cemetery at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Chapter 17. Grant, Sherman, Re-election, and Final Victory. The year 1864 marked a truly decisive period in the relentless progression of the American Civil War. Abraham Lincoln, facing the daunting prospect of re-election in the midst of the most devastating conflict in the nation's history. This campaign spanned from May to June 1864. These battles, including the Wilderness, Spotsylvania Courthouse, in May 1864, leading his large and well-disciplined Union armies from Chattanooga, Tennessee, towards the vital Confederate industrial and transportation hub of Atlanta, Georgia. Public morale was at a low ebb due to the extraordinarily high casualties sustained during Grant's relentless overland campaign and the perceived stalemate of the war, which seemed to have no end in sight. He secured a commanding 212 of 233 electoral votes and a strong majority of the popular vote. In March 1865, he delivered his second inaugural address, a deeply reflective and profoundly moving address delivered just weeks before his death. In it, he pondered the immense and complex meaning of the war, the often mysterious role of divine providence in human affairs, and above all, he issued a powerful and compassionate call for national reconciliation and profound national healing. Finally, on April 2, 1865, Petersburg fell, forcing the Confederate government to evacuate Richmond, its capital. Lee's remaining forces, severely diminished and exhausted, were pursued relentlessly by Grant's victorious Union Army. He urged the nation to move forward with a spirit of forgiveness and magnanimity. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia occurred on April 9, 1865. This moment signified the effective end of the American Civil War. The Union was at last preserved. The nation was reunited, and slavery, the fundamental cause of the conflict, was finally and permanently abolished across the entire country through the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which Lincoln himself had tirelessly worked for and personally championed. This was a monumental achievement, the culmination of 4 long years of brutal struggle and unimaginable sacrifice, a victory purchased at an almost incomprehensible price in blood and treasure. The nation could finally look towards peace and the monumental, yet hopeful, task of rebuilding under Lincoln's compassionate and wise leadership. The long, arduous war was finally and unequivocally over. A quiet, yet profound peace was beginning to settle over the exhausted, yet reunited land. The sounds of conflict slowly faded into the vast silence of history. With charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, eschewing vindictiveness, with malice toward none, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. This was a profound and incredibly compassionate vision for Reconstruction, for a peaceful and truly unified future for the nation, a legacy of unparalleled compassion, even in the face of immense suffering. It was a powerful testament to his resilient leadership, to his unwavering determination, and to the enduring belief of the populace in his steadfast vision for the nation's future. A devastating military campaign through the heartland of Georgia, where his army practiced a scorched earth policy, destroying Confederate infrastructure and crippling their remaining war-making capacity. He then turned northward through the Carolinas, further disrupting and ultimately breaking the Confederacy's ability to resist. This strategy of total war aimed not only to defeat enemy armies, but also to break the South's will to fight and to demonstrate the futility of continued resistance. It signaled that the immense sacrifices made would not be in vain, and that the commitment to union and to freedom would be upheld at all costs. The quiet sounds of the ballot box were reaffirming the louder sounds of war. Many political observers, and even some within his own party, believed Lincoln could not possibly win. His main opponent was his former general, George B. McClellan, who ran as the Democratic Party's nominee on a platform explicitly advocating for an immediate end to the war and a negotiated peace with the Confederacy. This presented a clear and stark contrast to Lincoln's steadfast and unwavering commitment to continue fighting until the Union was fully restored and slavery was finally and permanently abolished. After a series of masterful flanking maneuvers and fierce, often costly, fighting, Sherman successfully captured Atlanta on September 2, 1864. This victory was of immense strategic and equally important psychological significance. It unequivocally demonstrated to a weary Northern public that the Union was indeed winning the war, and provided a crucial and timely boost to Northern morale during a period of widespread war weariness and growing pessimism. And Cold Harbor resulted in immense and often staggering casualties for both sides. The scale of the bloodshed was unprecedented, but unlike previous Union commanders, these crucial military successes visibly demonstrated that the Union was indeed making tangible and irreversible progress towards ultimate victory, and that the war was not a stalemate, but was approaching its final stages. The votes of Union soldiers also played a crucial and often overlooked role, with many Union soldiers voting overwhelmingly for Lincoln, a powerful endorsement of his leadership and his war policy. Grant possessed an unyielding determination. He did not retreat or fall back after suffering heavy losses. Instead, he continually pressed Lee's forces, moving relentlessly southward towards the strategically vital Confederate capital of Richmond and the crucial rail hub of Petersburg. The campaign ultimately culminated in the 9-month siege of Petersburg, a protracted period of brutal and grinding trench warfare that effectively pinned down Lee's main army in a static defensive position. This relentless pressure and the continuous attrition of Confederate manpower and resources was central to Grant's overarching strategy of wearing down the Confederate forces to the point of exhaustion and ultimate collapse. The sounds of constant cannon fire and the cries of battle became the omnipresent soundtrack of this long, drawn-out campaign. After a disheartening series of leadership changes and repeated military disappointments in the crucial Eastern Theater, Lincoln, with characteristic wisdom and foresight, appointed Grant as General-in-Chief of all Union armies in March 1864, placed his profound faith and entrusted the ultimate fate of the Union in two crucial and uniquely effective military commanders, Ulysses S. Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman. This was a pivotal and transformative decision. Grant, with his relentless fighting style, his unyielding determination, his strategic focus on attrition, and his unwavering commitment to achieving decisive results, was precisely the type of aggressive and capable commander Lincoln had long sought and desperately needed. Grant immediately launched what became known as the Overland Campaign, a brutal and continuous series of pitched battles and relentless flanking maneuvers against General Robert E. Lee's formidable Army of Northern Virginia in the heartland of Virginia. Simultaneously, in the crucial Western Theater, Major General William Tecumseh Sherman launched his own major offensive. The Atlanta Campaign, the presidential election of 1864, occurred on November 8th. Lincoln's re-election prospects were, for much of the year, initially quite grim. However, Sherman's decisive capture of Atlanta in early September and Major General Philip Sheridan's subsequent and equally decisive victories in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia in October dramatically shifted the prevailing public opinion in the North. Lincoln's victory in the election of 1864 was a clear and undeniable mandate from the American people to continue the war to its conclusion and to fight for an uncompromised peace. Following his re-election, Lincoln focused intensely on bringing the devastating war to an end as swiftly as possible, and, crucially, on planning for the monumental challenges of post-war reconstruction. After the strategic capture of Atlanta, Sherman embarked on his famous and highly controversial March to the Sea from November to December 1864. Meanwhile, Grant's relentless siege of Petersburg continuously wore down and ultimately exhausted Lee's already dwindling forces. The formal surrender of General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia to General Ulysses S. Chapter 18, The Enduring Legacy of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln's legacy stands as an indelible, monumental testament to his profound and unparalleled impact on the course of American history and, indeed, on the broader trajectory of democratic governance, civil rights, and human liberty across the globe. He is universally remembered and revered with an almost mythical status as the preserver of the Union, the singular leader who, through unwavering resolve, unparalleled strategic acumen, and profound moral courage, successfully guided the fractured nation through its most perilous and existential crisis, the American Civil War, a cataclysmic conflict that threatened to permanently dismantle the very fabric of the nascent republic. The president who, through the courageous and transformative issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863, which, though limited in its initial scope, fundamentally shifted the war's moral purpose, and his relentless strategic efforts to secure the passage and eventual ratification of the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which formally abolished slavery nationwide in December 1865, forever ended the abhorrent institution of chattel human bondage throughout the entire United States and any territory subject to its jurisdiction. To his improbable and ultimately epoch-making rise to the highest office in the land embodies the very essence of the American dream and the profound potential for individual advancement within a truly democratic framework. He possessed a remarkable and complex blend of seemingly contradictory yet harmonized traits. To his ultimate triumphs over profound national division and his tragic, untimely end all contribute collectively to a comprehensive and nuanced understanding of one of the most significant and truly pivotal figures in all of human history, which adapted to the unprecedented challenges he faced his profound and pragmatic political philosophy, which primarily emphasized the preservation of the Union and the gradual, yet ultimately complete eradication of slavery, and the specific and often perilous historical circumstances of his transformative presidency. His legacy is forever etched in the annals of time, a profound and enduring inspiration for all who seek to understand the complexities of leadership, the immense burdens of profound responsibility, and the transformative power of moral conviction in shaping the destiny of nations and the future of humanity. The story of his life, a vast and intricate tapestry woven with threads of hardship, triumph, sorrow, and an enduring vision for a free and united America. The quiet hum of history continues on and on, a constant presence in the collective memory of the nation. The sounds of his enduring words still whisper through the ages, offers invaluable and timeless insights into the profound challenges and the ultimate triumphs of democratic governance and the arduous, yet essential, pursuit of justice for all humanity. Every single aspect of his existence, from the most mundane daily routines and personal anecdotes to the truly monumental historical acts, such as his executive orders, his legislative initiatives, his strategic military decisions, and his diplomatic efforts, all contribute to the grand, compelling, and perpetually unfolding narrative of his lasting and transformative impact on the United States and indeed on the entire world. His influence spans far beyond the specific events of the 19th century. His towering physical presence was often accompanied by a disarming, self-deprecating humor and a deep, almost melancholic, introspective, pensive nature. His profound wisdom and keen intellect were consistently tempered by a deep and often understated humility, and his profoundly eloquent speeches, such as the Gettysburg Address and the Second Inaugural Address, all continue to reverberate through contemporary discussions of American identity, of liberty, of equality, of justice, and of the enduring and often arduous quest for a more perfect union. This quest is a perpetual and ongoing journey for every successive generation of Americans to undertake, to wrestle with, and to strive towards a continuous and unwavering pursuit of the nation's highest ideals. His unwavering commitment to principle was meticulously balanced by a pragmatic willingness to compromise on non-essential matters for the greater good. His legendary honesty, which earned him the enduring moniker Honest Abe, was not merely a nickname but a deeply ingrained and defining aspect of his moral fiber. His unparalleled capacity for profound empathy for the suffering of common soldiers, for the unimaginable grief of bereaved families, and even for the eventual plight of the defeated South, was a defining and deeply moving characteristic of his magnanimous spirit. His leadership during the war was not authoritarian, despite the immense powers he wielded, but a steadfast adherence to constitutional principles, even under extreme duress. He continuously sought to uphold the rule of law and the processes of democratic governance, even while exercising extraordinary wartime powers. His remarkable ability to rally a deeply divided populace to a shared and noble cause through eloquent appeals to their better nature, to their shared history, and to their foundational principles, is a timeless testament to the enduring power of democratic persuasion and moral leadership. This act of profound moral and political will not only liberated 4 million enslaved individuals, but also fundamentally redefined the very meaning of American liberty and significantly expanded the scope of the nation's founding ideals. He irrevocably linked the preservation of the Union with the cause of human freedom, elevating the Civil War from a mere struggle for political unity into a titanic moral crusade for universal human dignity and justice. His actions and his steadfast leadership ensured that the grand experiment in democratic self-governance would not ultimately fail, and that the United States would emerge not as two separate and hostile nations. His extraordinary life story, from the most humble and unprivileged beginnings in a rudimentary log cabin on the raw Kentucky frontier, through persistent, arduous self-education and tenacious professional striving, but as a reunited, stronger, and more fundamentally just entity. Beyond his paramount role as the Union's savior, he is equally and profoundly celebrated as the great emancipator of slaves. He stands as an enduring symbol of democracy itself. His distinct character is also a central and fascinating component of his enduring legacy. The specific and often minute details of his early life, from his earliest struggles for mere survival and self-improvement on the raw American frontier, to his gradual yet determined acquisition of knowledge and practical skills through relentless and self-imposed study. The thorough and continuous study of his multifaceted character, his unique and continuously evolving leadership style, the resonant echoes of his pivotal debates with Stephen Douglas, which laid bare the fundamental moral contradictions of slavery, his transformative proclamations, such as the Emancipation Proclamation, which forever changed the war's purpose and infused it with moral authority. A Quiet Night with Abraham Lincoln, the history continuing to unfold in extensive, painstaking detail, in deliberate, thoughtful contemplation.